Creation of the realms. Aristeia watched the scene with embarrassment and boredom. Why I have to take part in it, she thought, playing with a flame closed in her hand. Gently tickles her skin. The royal scribe sat on both sides of her. Opposite, there was a girl with an angelic look, with blonde curls and blue eyes, staring at the map in the middle of the table. Aristeia knew that the only angelic thing about this girl was her look. Rena was the wife of the king of men, Hammerhead, and she was not a gentle and good woman. Hammerhead was at the end of his life, and the young wife was able to make him do whatever she wants, including participation in this council. A secret meeting of the Crisis Council in time of great longing. The guardians of the elements also sat at the table, having arrived from all corners of the world, distracted from the search for the being who's shaken the world in its foundations with her power. Apart from them, King Hammerhead with his wife Rena, the Queen of Elves, Tenero, the leader of the dwarves, Gruben and the scriptwriters, who made notes from the meeting, scraping with fidelity on a roll of paper. They all gathered in the basement of the old castle on a hill, from where the view of the Brosic mountain range stretched. The spacious chamber to which they were invited was dusty and hideous. The old tapestries were hanging on the stone walls, so dusty that it would be hard to guess what was embroidered on them. Broken tables and chairs were laid against the wall to make room for the largest of them, the only one for whom the passage of time was gracious. In the air, Aristeia felt the moisture and unpleasant smell of decayed wood. Stone walls did not protect against the cold from outside. Thus she supported the fire in the fireplace, which was the main source of light in the room, not counting the meager glow of the candles seeping from the rusty candelabra. She saw goosebumps on Rena's shoulders, who was only dressed in a silk dress of dark green that emphasized her waist. Aristeia almost sympathized with her choice of outfit. She noticed that her sister Zina, whom power was element of air, was also looking in this direction. They agreed in their thoughts, exchanging malicious remarks, and the guardian was holding her laughter. This was not a good time to laugh, because Gruben was throwing bullshits for Tenero to hear, because it's old-like world that elves and dwarves cannot live in harmony. Kay meddled in the conversation, and Aristeia has only now started to listen to what was being said. In general terms, they were supposed to be able to advise what to do with the being. "Please just stop for a moment," Kay said, extending his hand as a sign of protest. "Now is not the time to talk about whose cows give more milk." This was a contemptible statement used in the humans' world when talking about things that were not important. Tenero smiled at Kay, and it was an honest smile, including eyes. A straight, honest face. Very rare combination, Aristeia stated in thoughts. "Guardians," said the Queen of Elves and stood up. She wasn't tall, but it made an impression on Gruben, who had already stood up before, and Tenero was almost 2 heads taller than him. She approached the fireplace and turned to them, continuing, "The being is bound to your power. What can we do? Without any magic? You should find this child." "And it will happen," said with conviction Gallos, the second guardian of air. "Without doubts. We will find and overpower the being when it will be born." "Yeah, piece of cake," Kay snorted in thoughts. Aristeia shook her head. She knew that the gods had turned away from them for breaking the law, and they were too weak to fight that power. But this was not the time or place for their doubts. Any doubt would have put their credibility to the test, and the disrespect of the rulers was like death sentence. "You take care of the being, but what about us?" Gruben barked. "Have you seen this crack south of the merchant trail?" Hammerhead was nodding his head with a gloomy face. Rena indicated the place with its finger on the map. "It's here. It's not far from—" she started. "Our mines," Gruben growled. "As the earthquakes continue, they'll bury our most abundant sources of precious stones." Tenero snorted, but she said nothing, and Aristeia moved gently on the chair. Terrible legends circulated about the greed of dwarves. The worst thing about every legend was that it contained some element of truth. "Your mines," Hammerhead growled. "What about my quarries? Where do we get the stone from to build houses? A refuge? Winter is coming, the most dreadful since I've lived." "You are worried about houses, not about having someone to live in them," Tenero noticed loudly. The fire from the fireplace was playing in her eyes. Anastasia looked at her carefully, with interest and respect. Dwarves for what is underground, people for stone, and elves for people. What an absurdity, Kay threw in his thoughts. They will not come to an agreement here. A waste of time. She sighed. The rest of the Guardians were silently nodding their heads, wriggling on wooden chairs. I forgot that elves do not care about the mundane things. You are so proud and self-confident that I don't know how you can walk when you are still hovering in the air above others you consider inferior, Gruben shouted. Tenero's face remained stoic, but her eyes were full of anger. That's what I was going to ask you, Hammerhead interrupted. How is it that such luminous creatures graze their cows in the fields of my subjects? Those cows again. Sela looked at them in disbelief. I don't graze cows on your land, Hammerhead. You know very well that elves do not eat meat and do not graze the cows. Ask Gruben, Tenero said, losing patience. The dwarf leader turned red and began to deny it. The Guardians sat unshakable. Hammerhead hit the table with his fist and spilled wine on the map. Everybody was silent and looked at the trickles of red drink seeping on the map folds, soaking into paper, creating borders on the undivided map of their world. The gods wanted this, said Gruben, looking at the map. Tenero rolled her eyes. The leader of the people made a strange gesture with his hand and whispered strange words, nodding his head before he said, Yes, no more fighting. We will share this world as long as there is an opportunity to do so. The Guardians looked at each other in disbelief and stood up. Everyone stood behind Rena's back and looked at the map. The wine troughs divided it into 3 parts. Shaleas, Gartbuse, and Hernias, land of elves, dwarves, and people.